The water level on Lake Mead has dropped 130 feet since the late 1990s. What does that mean? That means the surface used to be up there.
Lake Mead's water levels surged unexpectedly in 2023, rising over 20 feet after years of relentless decline. At first glance, this might seem like a dramatic recovery, a rare win against a devastating drought that has gripped the Southwest. But what if this rebound is more dangerous than reassuring? Beneath the surface of returning water lies a disturbing story. Contaminants stirred from decades-old sediments, fragile infrastructure pushed to its limits, and a political system unprepared for harsh realities. The footage along the shoreline reveals more than revival. It exposes unsettling secrets we can't afford to ignore. The unexpected rise. In 2023, Lake Mead surprised everyone by rising more than 20 feet after years of relentless decline.
Lake Mead will now end 2023 7 feet higher than their prediction last month.
This sudden surge reversed dire predictions that the reservoir was heading toward terminal collapse. Boat ramps that had been closed for over a decade suddenly reopened, and marinas dusted off by the drought saw water creeping back to their docks. It was a visual resurrection on a scale that defied expectations, bringing a momentary sense of relief to millions who depend on the lake for water and power. Yet beneath this welcome rise, scientists and water managers sensed something more troubling that few saw at first glance. The sharp increase wasn't a simple return to normal. Officials remained cautious because the lake was still about 160 feet below full capacity, a tremendous shortfall representing billions of gallons of missing water. The rebound was impressive, but it masked an ongoing crisis that had been years in the making. Questions began circulating not about how high the water had risen, but what the rising water was covering up, literally. What lay beneath the newly submerged shoreline was a hidden legacy of pollution, exposed infrastructure vulnerabilities, and ecological disruption. Water levels climbed rapidly, but the shoreline revealed scars from the drought, a long period of evaporation that had left parts of the lakebed bone dry and exposed. During the 6 years leading to 2022, the lake lost nearly 3/4 of its volume, shrinking to just about a quarter of its capacity. This drawdown exposed sediment layers, old structures, and even sites with human remains, all artifacts stored beneath the water for decades. The flood of water that returned in 2023 resubmerged these zones, bringing unsettling questions about contamination and habitat disturbance. Meanwhile, the rapid refill did not simply restore a stagnant body of water. It stirred sediment layers that hadn't seen water or movement in years, allowing toxins and pollutants to re-enter the water column. These contaminants had been locked away, but now they were mixing anew with the lake's ecosystem. Early scientific observations raised alarms because the sediment disturbance was unlocking chemical threats nobody had fully anticipated. Instead of a simple reprieve, the lake's rebound was creating a complex environmental challenge just below the surface. There was also concern over the lake's aging infrastructure, which had been designed to operate under different conditions. Water intakes, pumping stations, and boat ramps had been exposed to decades of desert heat and freeze-thaw cycles without water insulation during the drought. Now, as the water level climbed back, these structures were thrust back into service without thorough testing or assurance of their durability. Engineers admitted they lacked sufficient data on how well these essential systems could perform under these renewed stresses. Community and government messaging painted the rising water as a hopeful sign, a symbol that nature and human management could still prevail despite climate challenges. But many scientists urged a more cautious perspective. They warned that this rebound might not be a true recovery, but rather a temporary fluctuation in a turbulent, shifting system. The question was whether society was seeing this refilling as a chance to restore the lake's health, or merely an illusion masking deeper trouble. The larger implications extended beyond just water levels and infrastructure conditions. The uncertainty surrounding the lake's future touched on policies, water rights, and interstate cooperation. One wrongful assumption could lead to the mismanagement of a resource already under tremendous stress. Water officials remained silent about many of these hidden costs, reluctant to share inconvenient truths amid political challenges. Still, as the boat ramps opened and marinas suggested vitality returning, the public's attention fixated on visible signs of renewal. The footage capturing these moments was widely shared and celebrated, but the images could not capture the subtler, more dangerous realities brushing silently along the shoreline, nor the cracks emerging beneath the surface. What seemed like good news was only the beginning of a far more complicated story. That resurgence compelled experts to dig deeper into what the water covered up and what remained exposed. And this mystery would soon reveal how far the crisis truly runs below the calm surface. Transitioning from this unexpected rise, it's crucial to understand the long and painful journey Lake Mead took before that moment, setting the stage for the challenges now surfacing in full view. Historical decline and recent recovery. For much of the previous decade, Lake Mead stood as a stark indicator of a worsening drought gripping the American Southwest. Between 2016 and 2022,
20 years or so, that bathtub ring in the background, it continues to get bigger as we're in this mega drought.
the reservoir steadily lost water, shrinking to just 26% of its full capacity by mid-2022.
It's a comparison of the water levels between just 2013 and a little more than a year ago. Look how much has just gone from Lake Mead.
The iconic bathtub rings etched into canyon walls told a silent story of loss, marking where the water line had fallen year after year. This image of retreat became a grim visualization for millions watching a vital water source dwindle under relentless heat and evaporation. The decline of the lake not only limits its visual impact, but also affects various aspects of the region that depend on the lake for their water, such as the security of water in the region, the operation of Hoover Dam, and farmers, city dwellers, and ecosystems. At the dam, the hydro turbines were operating close to the limit because of the low water level, which made it difficult to release water downstream.
Pump station does use more power to move water, so whenever possible, we try to use one of the other two intake pump stations.
It resulted in the activation of emergency measures such as the installation of new pumping systems fitted for crisis conditions, giving a temporary change in water management practices and extravagant interventions. Then, in the winter of 2022 to 2023, nature surprised everyone with unexpected record-breaking snowpack.
We are seeing record snowfall, record water content, which is everything we need. That's going to fill our reservoirs. It's really good.
Across the Rocky Mountains, the snowpack was surprisingly huge, exceeding forecasts and past trends, and it was around 150% to 200% of the normal levels in major watersheds. The snow was a remarkable surprise for the climate models, as they were predicting different scenarios. They were saying that the wet winters would be rare in the coming days because of the warming temperatures. When spring arrived and the snow started melting, the Colorado River system was nourished steadily for months, thus dramatically increasing the inflows into Lake Mead and Lake Powell upstream. The snow that fell in winter caused a rapid increase in the levels of the reservoirs basin-wide. The water level of Lake Mead was up by more than 20 feet, which was contrary to the Bureau of Reclamation's early 2023 projection, which had expected a 20-foot decrease by the end of the year. Lake Powell experienced an even higher elevation rise of more than 50 feet. The whole reservoir system presented a recovery, and even the Bureau of Reclamation could not have projected this. The snowpack responsible for the surge is a gift for the region, as it faced water shortages that were hard to manage in the past, and it still makes the choice of regions a water emergency. Nevertheless, this rebound was not just a moment of surprise. It demonstrated the delicate and shifting character of water in the area, a system that is easily affected by extremes and can quickly go from crisis to recovery. The abrupt change called into question the dependability of scientific models and predictions that inform policy and water management. Yet, more importantly, it highlighted the fact that such recoveries are really quite precarious when looked at through the lens of long-term trends of decline. Although the lake experienced an increase, it was still not even close to being full. The reservoir, which is about 160 feet below its full pool level, has billions of acre-feet less water than its historical capacity. The water that came back did not totally remove the effect of years of depletion. It only slowed down the decline, signifying a temporary truce rather than a victory. This subtlety was easily ignored in public celebrations or news reports that emphasized hope rather than the ongoing difficulties. This recent history shapes a crucial backdrop for understanding how deeply overextended the Colorado River system is, and how any signs of recovery come with persistent, unresolved risks. As the lake's past and sudden recovery highlight the system's volatility, they also expose the deeper structural problems rooted in water management and allocation that have long undermined sustainability. The Colorado River's structural crisis. Lake Mead is not just a lake. It is the linchpin of one of the most over-allocated river systems in North America. The Colorado River Compact of 1922 divided the river's flow among 7 states based on water availability data gathered during unusually wet decades. The agreement allocated roughly 16 million acre-feet per year, assuming a river with an abundant and consistent supply. However, recent scientific studies comparing tree ring data suggest the actual long-term average flow is closer to 13 million acre-feet, significantly less than the compact anticipated.
Lake level coming back down now, it's getting a little difficult. It's hard to find, especially if you gotta...
This fundamental overestimation set the stage for decades of tension and resource strain. The system operates on hopes rather than hydrological realities. Lake Mead, at full capacity, holds about 26 million acre-feet of water, making it the largest reservoir in the United States. But current levels remain far below this benchmark, and the gap translates to roughly 10 million acre-feet of missing water, more than the combined annual water allocations for California and Arizona. The reservoir's infrastructure reflects a history of adaptation and denial. As the lake approached dead pool levels, where Hoover Dam can no longer release water downstream, emergency infrastructure was rapidly put in place. New low-level intake pumping systems were installed mere years ago to access water reserves that previous engineers expected to remain untouched for decades. Southern Nevada even constructed a 3-mile tunnel through solid bedrock to reach these depths.
Takes us to the end of a tunnel that's 3 miles long that goes all the way underneath Lake Mead.
These measures are no longer emergency contingencies, but standard operations, signaling how dire the situation has become. Upstream, Lake Powell faces a similar crisis, with dangerously low water levels putting the hydroelectric turbines at risk and forcing emergency releases from reservoirs as far away as Wyoming and Colorado. Water managers engage in a complicated balancing act, shifting limited resources between reservoirs to prevent infrastructure failures while meeting demands downstream. This musical chairs-style water management underlines just how strained the system is and how close it comes to catastrophic breakdown. Meanwhile, downstream users, cities, farms, and communities continue to demand full water allocations based on outdated agreements.
And that's what we desperately need today, this first day of our water year.
Ignoring that the total supply available rarely meets those obligations. Such conflicting expectations worsen the crisis and heighten political friction. These structural challenges are exacerbated by climate change, which shifts precipitation patterns and increases evaporative loss, further shrinking the resource's reliability. This mismatch between legal agreements and environmental realities defines the crisis at Lake Mead and the Colorado River Basin. Without fundamental reform and honest reckoning with the river's limits, infrastructure updates and short-term rebounds cannot resolve the underlying imbalance that governs water distribution. The complexity of this structural crisis sets the stage for understanding the hidden dangers now being uncovered as the lake's waters return, and the true cost of prolonged drought becomes impossible to ignore. The resurgence of Lake Mead's water conceals as much as it reveals, and beneath the surface lie clues that demand closer scrutiny. Contaminants beneath the surface. As Lake Mead's waters surged back in 2023, they didn't just submerge old marinas and boat ramps, they also reactivated chemical processes that had been dormant for years.
Talk about Lake Mead leading into the 4th of July, poured on the receding water levels at the lake.
Sediments exposed during the drought had accumulated decades of pollutants, including heavy metals from mining upstream, industrial contaminants, and microplastics from urban runoff. When the water receded, these toxic layers settled and hardened in place, seemingly locked away from the aquatic ecosystem. But as the water rose, it disturbed and remobilized these sediments, turning the lake into a reactive chemical mixer with effects only now beginning to surface. One site of particular concern is the Las Vegas Wash.
Where the lake is at, in case you're familiar with the Las Vegas Valley, I know if you've ever had to travel to Lake Mead, whether it's for recreation.
A primary drainage channel that funnels treated wastewater, urban runoff, and industrial discharge into Lake Mead. Over years of low water levels, this outflow created a growing delta of contaminated sediment at the confluence point. Among the accumulations are perchlorate compounds, rocket fuel components that have been found in concentrations exceeding safe drinking water standards in some samples.
So Lake Mead has 3 intake pipes. There are 2 intake pipes already built to supply drinking water.
Such chemicals moving back into the water column threaten to enter the broader watershed as the lake's currents churn up the sediments. The shaking up of sediments is enhanced by natural forces in the lake: wave action, temperature layers known as thermal stratification, and biological activity in newly submerged zones all help draw pollutants from the bottom layers into the circulating waters. Contaminants that had been buried and inert are now becoming bioavailable, meaning they can enter food chains and potentially harm fish populations, birds, and even humans relying on this water. This recontamination is a startling reversal that challenges assumptions that rising water is always beneficial. Compounding the chemical risks are physical hazards made visible only after reflooding. The National Park Service has issued warnings about submerged dangers such as old structures, sunken vehicles, and debris fields left from demolished marinas. These hazards pose safety threats for boaters and disrupt habitats. The submerged remnants are physical reminders of the reservoir's fluctuating history and the unresolved consequences of the drought years. The contamination issue isn't limited to chemicals alone. As the lake refills, it becomes a conduit for invasive species that thrive in disturbed environments. But before turning to these biological threats, it's important to grasp how precarious the balance is in the water itself. Scientists are investigating how the renewed circulation might increase the mobility of microplastics, which have become embedded in sediments over decades of urban runoff. These tiny particles are ingested by aquatic organisms, leading to toxin bioaccumulation that spreads through the ecosystem.
To extremes about the incredible ways people are fighting the record drought in the West.
The unsettling reality is that the rising water did not purify or reset the lake's condition, but stirred a toxic cocktail that threatens to worsen water quality. This dynamic challenges efforts to declare the lake's rebound a success. The environmental risks beneath the surface multiply quietly, unseen by those focused on the surface-level narrative of recovery. The danger lies not only in what the water covers up, but in what it exposes through renewed interaction. Water management agencies have been cautious, sharing limited information about the scale of contamination concerns. The complexity of tracking pollutants and their shifting concentrations makes monitoring difficult. Moreover, the sediment disturbance creates new variables in water treatment and safety planning, that engineers and scientists are only beginning to quantify. These unknowns add another layer of uncertainty to an already fragile system. Understanding these hidden dangers is crucial for grasping the full scope of Lake Mead's condition. The story told by rising water levels is incomplete without acknowledging the unseen and potentially toxic consequences lurking beneath. As the lake's chemistry changes, so too must the approach to managing this vital but vulnerable resource. But chemical contaminants are only part of the evolving challenge. Biological threats are growing alongside. The resurgence of aquatic life, both native and invasive, sets the stage for a new chapter of ecological tension, where recovery and disruption collide. Invasive species and ecological disruption. The return of water to previously dry zones along Lake Mead's shoreline has reopened habitats, but not all the life returning is benign. Invasive species such as quagga mussels, which established themselves years ago, are finding new territory to colonize as submerged surfaces expand. These tiny but prolific creatures cling to boats, docks, and underwater structures, spreading rapidly into formerly exposed areas. The rising water ironically accelerates their movement by allowing boats to reach places that were safely isolated during drought. Quagga mussels filter water at extraordinary rates, which might sound positive at first. Yet, this filtering concentrates toxins in their tissues and disrupts nutrient cycles in the lake's ecosystem. By altering the balance of algae and other microorganisms, they create ripples that cascade through the food web, ultimately affecting fish populations and other wildlife. The accelerated spread of these mussels adds pressure to a system already burdened by environmental stress. Beyond quagga mussels, the fluctuating water levels create unstable conditions for native species struggling to adapt.
The Bureau released its 2- and 5-year projections earlier this year, showing levels hovering at about 1,000 feet.
Habitats that were dry for years flood suddenly, while others remain parched. This irregularity threatens the survival of fish, amphibians, and bird species adapted to steady conditions. The ecological upheaval tests the resilience of Lake Mead's biological community and raises concerns about long-term biodiversity. Efforts to control invasive species face significant challenges, especially given the vast size of the reservoir and the connectivity of waterways. Prevention measures focus on cleaning boats and equipment to limit mussel transport, but enforcement is inconsistent. Meanwhile, the mussel's ability to thrive in a wide range of conditions makes eradication nearly impossible. Their presence represents a permanent alteration of Lake Mead's ecosystem. With consequences, scientists are still working to understand. This biological shift further complicates water management. Mussels clog intake pipes, reducing water flow efficiency and increasing maintenance costs for utilities relying on the lake.
These mussels clog pipes and engines, damaging water systems and boats. They also disrupt the food chain and pollute beaches with sharp shells.
Infrastructure vulnerabilities exposed by low water levels become even more critical when invasive species threaten essential water delivery systems. These costs are felt indirectly by millions who depend on Lake Mead's supplies for drinking water and electricity generation. The spread of invasive species also intersects with human activity and policy. Boaters, fishermen, and recreational users unintentionally facilitate the movement of mussels, requiring ongoing education and regulation. Meanwhile, political efforts to address ecological disruptions lag behind the rapid pace of change. This disconnect reflects broader tensions in managing a water system stretched thin across environmental, economic, and social domains.
So the economic impact is real. It's severe.
It's huge. It's costing us money.
Invasive species join the long list of challenges faced by Lake Mead as it tries to recover from the unprecedented drought. Their ability to exploit changing conditions highlights the unpredictable outcomes of fluctuating water levels and acts as a warning sign. The delicate balance between recovery and collapse depends not just on the volume of water, but on the complex web of life it supports or threatens. As the lake attempts to reclaim its former vitality, it must navigate ecological pitfalls that demand urgent attention. The entwined issues of contamination and invasive species reveal that Lake Mead's rebound is more than a story of water returning. It is a story of disruption beneath the waves that threatens the reservoir's future stability. Political deadlock and water rights conflict. The resurgence of Lake Mead's water levels sparked more than just environmental concerns. It reignited fierce political battles over who controls the dwindling resource. Water allocation in the Colorado River Basin is governed by the century-old Colorado River Compact, an agreement crafted in 1922.
In 1922, the Colorado River Compact was signed, which sought to allocate water rights
amid a period of unusually abundant flow. That pact divided water among 7 states and tribes based on assumptions now widely considered outdated and overly optimistic. As the reservoir declines, entrenched interests clash over how to cut usage, but agreement remains elusive. By 2023, the lower basin states, Arizona, California, and Nevada, faced federal demands to reduce water use by 2 to 4 million acre-feet annually. Yet when asked to voluntarily comply, these states could not reach a consensus. The failure triggered the Biden administration to impose cuts, setting off legal challenges and fierce interstate recriminations. Cities blamed farmers for minimal reductions in irrigation. Farmers, in turn, accused urban areas of unfair water consumption. California became a particular focal point, accused by neighbors of resisting equitable sharing of the hardship. The conflict reveals the insurmountable systemic fractures that have existed for a long time. The compact, which was the basis of the conflict, was constructed on mistakenly high water flow estimates, and the river currently does not deliver those amounts. The governance framework faces a serious struggle to keep pace with the realities that are changing. The tribes, whose senior water rights go back to before the establishment of the compact, have been influencing the negotiations by putting forward their claims that could cause dramatic redistribution of water. At the same time, the environmental organizations have resorted to legal actions to enforce the protection of the endangered species, which might lead to further restrictions on water deliveries. Trust issues and conflicting priorities have characterized the negotiations, while individual local efforts have, in some cases, shown very different outcomes. Tucson, Arizona, was commended for its voluntary relinquishment of tens of thousands of acre-feet of its water allocation. Nevertheless, the surrender was only made possible through Tucson's earlier investments in alternative water sources and conservation measures made decades before the crisis. On the other hand, large agricultural operations that take up about 70% of the total water supply made very small cuts in their water intake while continuing to grow water-hungry crops like alfalfa for export. This gap shows how unequal the present-day water management practices are. Regulatory measures taken to deal with the crisis have usually been superficial. For instance, Nevada, among others, imposed strict residential water usage limitations and totally prohibited non-functional lawns. However, the luxurious use of water continues. Water is still being pumped into the desert at Las Vegas's Bellagio fountains, and golf courses on imported grass still thrive. All these actions reflect the reality that the political willpower for real structural change is still low and is being limited by the economic interests and the expectations of the public. The merits of conservation measures often seem to be only superficial rather than radical. The larger issue is political deadlock, along with diminishing resources. All parties involved take care of their own share, making it very hard to come up with a common sacrifice. The old governance system lacks the necessary power that could make it possible to enforce significant cuts across various areas. Without cooperation, the system has no other choice than to fail. Although the conditions are getting drier and the water level in the reservoirs is falling at the same time. When optimism clouds reality, hard questions about what recovery truly means become crucial. Questioning the notion of recovery. The surge in Lake Mead's water levels during 2023 was widely celebrated.
We've got some good news for Lake Mead. More water is being sent to Lake Mead
As a sign that the worst drought was over, a moment of relief in a long crisis. But many scientists warn that calling it a recovery is misleading, even dangerous. What happened was not a permanent turnaround, but a temporary fluctuation caused by an extraordinary winter snowpack, one event that broke a pattern of decades-long decline. This rebound masks a deeper, ongoing crisis that continues to challenge assumptions about water security in the Southwest. While the lake's levels rose, they remained about 160 feet below full capacity, a massive deficit. The recovery, which led to the reflection of water loss amounting to billions of gallons, nonetheless, was better than the preceding years, but still grave as far as the historic averages and previous droughts of the 1990s are concerned. In many respects, what is now accepted as normal would have been categorized as a disaster then. The change of perception about the standard is an implicit psychological as well as a policy risk. Urgency gets lessened, and inferior or postponed action gets justified. The narrative of resilience founded on short-term gains has caused water managers and officials to express their views still optimistically about wet cycles and climate variability. But this outlook makes the long-term climate change, decoupled with carbon emissions, trend of rising temperatures, increasing evaporation, and decreasing precipitation, which are predicted by the models to worsen over time to come to be ignored. Although supported by one wet year, the decision-makers risk underestimating the severity and the permanence of drought conditions. Furthermore, the temporary spike has also brought forth the indifference of the politicians and the public. The advertisements and campaigns for conserving water had their impact reduced the moment the dangers ceased to be immediate. The people whose water credential is renewed have been arguing that the drastic cutbacks and structural reforms that were forced upon them can be postponed, if not completely put off, indefinitely. The unwillingness magnifies the constraints on efforts to get ready for the more intense and longer droughts that will be the future. Scientists monitoring the basin have grown increasingly cautious. Their projections now embrace probabilities and scenarios over certainties because the climate system itself is entering a regime with no historical precedent. Hydrological models that failed to predict the 2023 rebound underscore the limitations of relying on past data to forecast a future that is rapidly changing. This fundamental uncertainty complicates water management and policymaking alike. This fragile illusion of recovery must be challenged before it becomes a catalyst for deeper collapse. The clock is ticking, and Lake Mead's true future depends on recognizing the limits of short-term relief amid a long-term crisis. The uncertain future of Lake Mead. As 2026 approaches, the expiration of the Colorado River water-sharing agreements places Lake Mead at a critical crossroads. Last updated in 2007,
a new agreement could help slow the declining water levels at Lake Mead.
These agreements were built on assumptions that no longer match today's climate realities. Future negotiations will be contentious as states, tribes, industries, and environmental groups compete over a shrinking and increasingly unreliable water supply. The challenge is not only how to divide water, but whether a sustainable framework is still possible. Climate projections for the Southwest point to continued warming, higher evaporation, and more erratic precipitation. Exceptional snowpack years like 2023 may become rare, while prolonged drought becomes the norm. This variability undermines long-standing planning models and leaves water managers operating without a stable baseline. Infrastructure faces growing uncertainty as well. Emergency intake systems and exposed facilities have not been fully tested under fluctuating reservoir levels, raising concerns about sediment buildup, structural stress, and long-term durability. Maintaining and upgrading these systems will require costly coordination across jurisdictions. Environmental damage continues downstream, where the Colorado River rarely reaches its delta. devastating ecosystems and indigenous communities. Proposed solutions such as water markets and desalination offer limited relief. Markets may disadvantage rural and agricultural users, while desalination is energy-intensive and slow to implement. Ultimately, political will remains the most unpredictable variable. Competing interests and unresolved rights complicate negotiations, and past failures highlight how fragile future agreements may be. The perception that Lake Mead is recovering risks masking deeper systemic problems. Without bold reforms addressing both hydrology and governance, the reservoir's future remains deeply uncertain. Public awareness, doe and consumption patterns add another layer of complexity. Urban growth across the Southwest continues despite mounting water stress, driven by economic incentives and the illusion of long-term security provided by large reservoirs. Conservation efforts have made measurable gains, yet efficiency improvements often lead to rebound effects, where saved water is reallocated rather than left in the system. Without cultural and behavioral shifts that redefine expectations around growth and water use, technological and policy solutions alone are unlikely to stabilize Lake Mead's future. Lake Mead's brief surge was a moment of hope, shadowed by hidden dangers and political challenges. This isn't a story of recovery. It's a call to confront an urgent crisis before it deepens. If you found this important, please like and subscribe to stay informed on stories shaping our world's most critical resources.